Coming up on Bridge City News, Alberta Health Services confirms the death of a senior related to COVID-19 at a care home in Lethbridge. The province announces more funding to support programs combating suicides in Medicine Hat. And it was a big celebration in Texas on Tuesday night as the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Health has confirmed that a man in his 90s has died from COVID-19 related symptoms at the Edith Cavell Care Centre in South Lethbridge. AHS also notified the Lethbridge School Division that there's an outbreak at Winston Churchill High School with 3 confirmed cases of the virus. The Holy Spirit Catholic School Division was also notified about a positive case at Catholic Central High School here in Lethbridge. Alberta Health says there are currently 157 active coronavirus cases in our city. In total, the South Zone has 256 active cases. Across Alberta, there are 4,793 active cases of COVID-19. The town of Coaldale has voted against a mandatory mask bylaw after an overwhelming response from citizens indicated that they were not in favor. Town Councillor Brianne Simpson hosted a Facebook poll. Out of 353 responses, 304 people said they're dead set against it.
In the end, people just want to be able to make their own decision and be able to do that. And there's also the people that medically cannot wear a mask that are struggling in cities like Lethbridge to be able to shop, because many of the shop owners now enforce that to such a degree that even though they have a medical condition, they can't shop. So they're actually coming out to Coaldale to shop. We also want people to understand, those that wear masks and choose not to wear a mask, that those are those personal decisions, and we don't want arguments or negativity brought out towards either side of it. And we just hope we can work together and support each other.
The Coaldale Chamber of Commerce also put out a poll on mandatory masks. Out of 71 respondents, 77% opposed a potential bylaw. Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says the province needs more contact tracers and a faster turnaround on COVID-19 test results. Those are some of the recommendations she made to address the rising COVID-19 cases and reduce the risk of another large-scale lockdown. Alberta has around 800 contact tracers, but Notley says a recent Harvard study suggests we really need more than 1,300. The government of Alberta is pitching in with $220,000 to help with suicide prevention supports in Medicine Hat. The funding will go towards awareness and training programs being offered by the Canadian Mental Health Association. There will also be workshops offered to educate on warning signs of suicide among adults and children. In a release, Addictions and Mental Health Minister Jason Lawan said the Alberta government has been actively engaged with AHS and local community agencies to ensure a coordinated response and enhanced services to meet the needs. The MLA for Brooks Medicine Hat, Michaela Glasgow, says the provincial support will help support families who are affected and raise awareness to resources available.
We know as a community, I know as an MLA in Medicine Hat, that we are experiencing immeasurable and unbelievable loss. And we have so many people in Medicine Hat who are suffering, and this money will go to help them and support them and to provide programming for those who need it the most.
Medicine Hat Mayor Ted Clugston, meanwhile, says the funding for the workshops is greatly appreciated since suicide among young men is a real concern for many in his community.
It's 9 or 10 young men we've lost to mental health issues, suicide. And it has been men. I can say it's men, and it is young men. And I call them young men. 35 years of age is probably the average age, plus or minus 5 years. And so when you think about an emergent and the most acute health issue in my community right now is mental health. It's not COVID, and there's empty beds in the hospital, but we're losing life years. I call it life years right now in Medicine Hat. If you think that the average male can live to 85 and they're ending their lives by choice at age 35, that's 50 productive years or 50 years of their life that are gone, versus COVID takes, unfortunately, the elderly. So we are immensely appreciative of any help we can have here.
The Canadian Mental Health Association of Medicine Hat also recently received $100,000 from the government's COVID-19 Community Grant Program to expand an addiction crisis program in the Gas City, offering outreach supports for both adults and youth. A major issue in the Crow's Nest Pass is creating a divide in the community. The province recently rescinded a 40-year policy which would allow for open-pit coal mining in southwestern Alberta. Now, one project, the Grassy Mountain Coal Mine, is being assessed by a joint review panel this week. Some city officials and residents are excited about the economic impact the project will bring, while others worry about the potential environmental impacts, specifically when it comes to the water.
Wells in Sparwood had to be closed and because of selenium contamination, and they had to drill a new well. So we just want to make sure that doesn't happen here, and that there's monitoring in place to make sure that if we see that selenium concentration grow, that there's immediate steps taken, and that we cannot have it impacting the downstream Old Man River, where it would impact the city and the agriculture. So that would be pretty catastrophic, because we just don't have that scientific way to remove it properly at our water treatment plants. And even at the mine site, there is some question of, will they be able to remove it? And how much will they be able to remove? Because we're talking large amounts of water.
If built, the Grassy Mountain coal mine is expected to provide 4.5 million tons of steelmaking coal for foreign export. The 2020 edition of the Miss Universe Canada pageant was held in Toronto recently in the midst of a global pandemic. Now, we spoke to a couple of the contestants who are both from Southern Alberta on their experiences with the pageant.
It was all pre-recorded, so it was super crazy because all of the girls knew who the winner was, but we weren't allowed to say anything to anybody until it was live and had finished airing where it did, which there was a lot of technical difficulties, so it was even longer than we expected. So all the girls were like, oh, we just want to spill it and let's tell everybody. But we weren't able to. So that was super different. And then typically they take us out to like sponsored dinners and everything, and we were only able to have one, and it was sponsored directly to us. So they brought us the food, and then we had a Zoom call with one of the performers at the restaurant who does belly dancing, and that was incredible. So she did a little performance for us.
For me, the biggest highlight was actually just the more time that we got to spend with the delegates. There's never been a pageant year I've ever been a part of that had a closer group of girls. So I actually competed for Miss Universe Canada in 2015. So it was kind of interesting because I had a comparable experience. And typically in a pageant, they'll actually take you around Toronto, go and see the CN Tower, take you around and like show you the city. And obviously that wasn't something that was going to happen for us this year. But in lieu of that, we actually got a lot more time spent together, like whether it be in our hotel rooms or just rehearsal time.
The winner of the Miss Universe Canada pageant was anti-racism advocate Nova Stevens from British Columbia. There's a new exhibit at the Galt Museum and Archives called the Marathon of Memories, 40 years of the Terry Fox Run in Lethbridge. As Micah Quinn explains now, viewers will be able to see the stories and pictures relating to Terry Fox that inspired so many.
It took Bobby Fox 6 months to gather pictures and stories from people who have participated in Terry Fox runs for the past 40 years.
I had done a previous exhibit on the Terry Fox Run in Lethbridge for the 35th anniversary, but it was a very kind of cursory look into it, and I always wanted to do it again, but this time really delve into why Terry means so much to the people of Lethbridge.
The exhibit is split into 4 sections that cover 3 rooms at the Galt Museum.
The first section kind of talks about the run in general over the last 40 years. And then the next section talks about the run organizers, so the volunteers that actually put the Terry Fox runs together. And the third section actually looks at a very pivotal day in our history with the Terry Fox Run, which was the memorial that was held here in Lethbridge on July 2nd, 1981 at City Hall. The final section is talks about our close connection with the Fox family here in Lethbridge.
Fox has a few favorite photos that are now on display.
This is a photo of Gordon and Jean Packer. And Jean here, she actually is a survivor of polio. And in order for her to participate in the run, her husband actually made this contraption to allow her to actually participate.
The Marathon of Memories exhibit will be set up at the Galt Museum and Archives until February 14th of 2021. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Kinsman Club of Lethbridge is hosting the 8th annual Tricks for Eats Halloween food drive in support of the Lethbridge Food Bank. Now, how it works is the bags are dropped off at houses for specific routes. The Lethbridge Food Bank is asking residents to donate non-perishable food items in those particular bags.
basically in the south side, and one is the Agnes Davidson and the Lakeview area. And the bags were dropped off to these homes and these locations. The bags are specific with information on them as to what they can donate. Community can donate to our food bank. And on Friday, after 6 p.m., the Kinsman Group will be dressed up and going out and picking up these bags and delivering them here on Saturday. And it's such an amazing way of supporting our organization. It's such a safe way of supporting the Lethbridge Food Bank and those that are in need. And we're truly grateful for Kinsman Club of Lethbridge for supporting us that way.
Last year, the Halloween food drive collected 1,342 pounds worth of food. The provincial government released Halloween guidelines for parents and kids. They include not going trick-or-treating when feeling ill, avoiding doorbells and handles, and socially distancing from other children. There's a lot to think about this year when it comes to safety. Lethbridge Police have some safety tips of their own that are relevant even if there's not a pandemic.
For the motorist aspect, we want the kids to be watching out, but in the motorist, you're in a residential area, be very cognizant. There are going to be kids out there, whether you agree or disagree with the kids trick-or-treating because of the pandemic going on, there are going to be some kids out there, and they aren't going to be paying attention maybe as they should be. So take that extra couple seconds, don't be in a rush. Maybe just slow down an extra 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. It's only take a minute out of your life. It's better than taking a life itself.
Don Mazinkowski, who served as a member of parliament for decades, passed away on Tuesday night. He was 85. The House of Commons held a moment of silence in honor of the native of Viking, Alberta. Mazinkowski was also the MP for Vegreville, Alberta for 25 years, winning 7 general elections beginning in 1968. He served as cabinet minister under 2 prime ministers, Joe Clark and Brian Mulroney. He was also a Conservative deputy prime minister from 1986 to 1993. The province of Manitoba is reporting COVID-19 outbreaks at 16 personal care homes. Health officials say 225 people, including 171 residents, have tested positive for the virus, and 26 people have died to date. Parkview Place in Winnipeg continues to experience the largest care home outbreak, which includes 19 deaths. The province's 117 people have tested positive for the virus at Parkview, including 31 staff and 86 non-staff. Manitoba saw another spike in COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, with a single-day record of 184 total cases, along with 3 deaths linked to the outbreaks in Winnipeg. Ontario, meanwhile, is reporting 834 new cases of the novel coronavirus today, along with 5 new deaths related to the virus. Health Minister Christine Elliott says 299 of the new cases are in Toronto. The province is also reporting 92 new cases in schools, including at least 40 among students. Currently, 595 of the province's 4,800 publicly funded schools have at least 1 case of COVID-19. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says the COVID-19 pandemic has made things really tough on many groups, including seniors, essential service workers, and agriculture sector employees. Tam says she would like to see a collaboration aimed at helping these groups and others as the pandemic continues.
Some of the supports for low-income earners who have precarious work. So those who are in precarious work conditions will do less well under any health crisis. So I have seen some of that as well. Support for violence against women, support for shelters, support for food security, support for childcare and education.
An Ontario judge says the trial for the man who killed 10 people when he drove a van down a busy Toronto sidewalk will be conducted via Zoom. Alec Manassian faces 10 charges of first-degree murder and 16 counts of attempted murder in connection with the April 2018 attack. The trial is set to begin on November the 10th. It will focus on Manassian's state of mind at the time of the attack and not on whether he did it. Transport Canada has some work to do when it comes to improving the transport and storage of dangerous goods like oil and corrosive chemicals. That's according to Andrew Hayes, the interim federal environment commissioner. Hayes says the department needs to do more to follow up when it finds violations of safety rules.
We found that the department still did not systematically follow up to ensure that companies address violations identified through inspections. In addition, the department had not given final approval to many companies' plans to respond to emergencies. I would say that since 2011, Transport Canada has made some improvements. We have highlighted that there are important improvements yet to make. It's concerning when we do see that that the final approval for emergency response plans hasn't been done because there are still directives and criteria that the department has to put in place.
South of the border, U.S. President Donald Trump continued down the campaign trail in rain-soaked Lansing, Michigan. Once again, he was on the offensive, slamming U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden.
And then I saw Sleepy Joe. So he came out yesterday, right? And you're going to see this. He came out yesterday, and he made a speech, and then they had to rip him off the stage because he had lost it, because he's gone. Anyway, I don't sound like a politician because I'm not a politician. I never wanted to be a politician. I became a politician for one very specific reason, because we're doing a job in the history of our country. In the first 3.5 years, nobody has done what we and this administration has been able to do, with regulations, with taxes, with rebuilding our military, with strengthening our borders. By the way, if he gets in, he's going to raise your taxes at a level that nobody's ever seen.
The U.S. presidential election is coming up on November the 3rd. Joe Biden, meanwhile, is campaigning in Georgia. He's telling Americans to clear the decks for action on everything from the coronavirus pandemic to the economy if he's elected president.
If you give me the honor of serving as your president, clear the decks for action, for we will act. We will act on the first day of my presidency to get COVID under control. This place, Warm Springs, is a reminder that though broken, each of us can be healed. That as a people and a country, we can overcome this devastating virus. That we can heal a suffering world. And yes, we can restore our soul and save our country.
It was a big celebration in Arlington, Texas last night. The Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series. The club beat the Tampa Bay Rays 3-1 to capture the title 4-2. It's the first World Series win for the club since 1988 and their 7th championship overall. Dodgers star Justin Turner had to be pulled in the middle of the game after testing positive for COVID-19. Corey Seager was named the series' most valuable player. By the way, Dave Roberts became only the 3rd skipper to win a World Series with the Dodgers, joining Hall of Famers Walter Alston and Tommy Lasorda. You know, across southwestern Alberta, it's feeling a bit like spring or summer baseball. The meltdown continues across much of our region. The Chinook winds have brought us some warm temperatures, and that warm weather will be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. We have been receiving more seasonal weather lately, and we should be hitting double-digit temperatures very soon. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we could be hitting 20 degrees within the next week.
Yeah, those temperatures are going to just keep on rising, and as you'll see into early next week, we could even hit into the close to the mid-20s there. But for now, into this evening, partly cloudy skies, we could see a southwest wind gusting to 50 kilometers per hour. Overnight low of 1 degree. Into tomorrow, 8 degrees is our high. We could see a bit of wind as well. Sunshine tomorrow. The overnight low tomorrow evening, 2 degrees. And now let's take a look at what's happening for our 5-day forecast. We will see that we are climbing into the double digits starting on Friday, high of 13 degrees under sunny skies, sunshine continuing through the weekend here. 7 degrees is our high for Halloween. On Sunday, November the 1st, we are climbing up to 16 degrees. And then look what's going to happen for us on Monday, up to 24 degrees. I wonder if that'll be a national high for us. That would be kind of awesome. Mix of sun and cloud expected on Tuesday with a high of 17 degrees. Now, the almanac tells us the average time, or the average temperature for this time of year rather, is 10 degrees. We are certainly getting higher than that. Average lows -3. High temperature on this day was 23 degrees. That was in 1944. -26 was the chilliest temperature on record. That was in 1991. The sun got up this morning at 8:14 a.m. and our evening sunset tonight at 6:16 p.m. Right around 10 hours of daylight is what that gives us. Now let's take a look what's happening across the country for our high temperatures. Tomorrow, 13 degrees is the high on the west coast, both Victoria and Vancouver. Vancouver could see chance of drizzle tomorrow. Mix of sun and cloud in both Calgary and Edmonton. 4 degrees the high in Calgary, 6 over in Edmonton. As we look across to the rest of the prairies, we're seeing some crazy weather happening specifically in Regina. 60% chance of showers in the morning, switching to 60% chance of flurries for later on in the day. 4 degrees is the high. 5 for Saskatoon. They could also see a chance of flurries. Mix of sun and cloud expected tomorrow in Winnipeg with a high of 0. Now, as we move over into Toronto, they could see some drizzly periods tomorrow. 7 degrees is the high. 4 for Ottawa with a chance of flurries. Mix of sun and cloud expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of 7 degrees. And as we get into the Maritimes here, partly cloudy skies expected for Fredericton, 7 degrees. 7 also expected in Charlottetown. Charlottetown could see a chance of some showers there. Drizzly periods expected as well in Halifax tomorrow with a high of 8 and a high of 5 degrees in St. John's, Newfoundland with a chance of showers. There you go, that is your weather.
Drug maker Pfizer, one of the leaders in the race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, is tweaking its timeline for when it will know if its experimental 2-dose shot works. Company executives had expected data from their 44,000-person international study would show by this weekend how well it prevents coronavirus infections. But in a conference call, Chief Executive Albert Bourla said the answer may not come until sometime next week. The Bank of Canada is predicting the economy will not fully rebound until the year 2022. It says its prediction is dependent on the path of the COVID-19 pandemic. The central bank did as expected earlier today, keeping its key interest rate at 0.25%. It estimates the Canadian economy will shrink by 5.7% this year. Work on the Trans Mountain Pipeline was put on hold on Tuesday after a worker died at the West Edmonton site. Occupational Health and Safety says a piece of equipment struck and killed the worker around 2:30 p.m. The worker was employed by SA Energy, a company that is under contract to Trans Mountain. OHS is investigating the death. Boeing will cut more jobs as it continues to lose money during a pandemic that has smothered demand from airlines for new airplanes. The company says it expects to cut its workforce by 30,000 to around 130,000 employees by the end of next year. Now, that is far deeper than the 19,000 reduction the company announced 3 months ago. Boeing updated its plans for jobs as it reported a $449 million loss for the third quarter. That's a swing from the $1.17 billion it earned during the same period last year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 434 points in the day to finish at 15,586. The Dow was down 943 points to 26,519. The S&P 500 was down 119 points to 3271. That's the worst stock rout in 4 months for the S&P 500. The Nasdaq was down 426 points to 11,004. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 224 to 37.33 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to $3 US. Gold was up 16 cents to 1877.34 US an ounce, and silver was unchanged at 23.39 US an ounce. Wheat is at $270 per metric ton, barley's at $268, canola's at $534, and corn is at $272 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 63 cents to $104.68, feeder cattle were up $1.53 to $129.95, and lean hogs were down $1.28 to $66.38. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.05 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta Health has confirmed that a man in his 90s has died from COVID-19 related symptoms at the Edith Cavell Care Centre in South Lethbridge. AHS also notified the Lethbridge School Division that there's an outbreak at Winston Churchill High School with 3 confirmed cases now of the virus. The Holy Spirit Catholic School Division was also notified about a positive case at Catholic Central High School here in Lethbridge. The Trudeau Liberals are saying that Canadians should not get together with extended family this Christmas. Political correspondent Brian Lilly has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Bikers Building Bridges is hosting their 2nd annual Halloween drive-through trunk or treat, taking place at Exhibition Park's north parking lot on Halloween night going from 5:30 to 9 p.m. Come out for a spooky good time. Decorate your vehicle and hand out candy safely. For details about this event and to register your trunk, visit bikersbuildingbridges.com. The Juno Beach Centre is Canada's only museum in Normandy dedicated to honouring the contributions of 1.1 million men and women who served during World War II. This year, support a worthy cause and take part in the Remembrance Day races being held until November 28th. You can register for one of 3 virtual race distances, each with its own special meaning. Participants will receive a race kit that includes a commemorative medal, a Juno Beach collector coin, a bracelet, and more. For details and to register, visit junobeach.org. Bring your lunch and enjoy beautiful live music at the same time. Come out November 6th to the first Friday Lunch and Listen concert series featuring performances by the University of Lethbridge Conservatory of Music in Cass's Community Room beginning 12:15 p.m. and ending at 1. First Friday events are an initiative brought to you by the Heart of Our City Committee. For a full listing of upcoming events, visit firstfridaylethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
First, the federal government told us that Thanksgiving get-togethers were frowned upon with people outside of our immediate family. And now, Ottawa is saying Christmas gatherings may not happen because of rising COVID-19 cases across the country. To talk more about this is political journalist Brian Liddy joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, not getting together for important family gatherings, many argue this is more damaging on our health than the actual COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, and let me be frank here. This comes from comments made by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with some vernacular language. You can tell me if I can repeat his phrase on the air or not. But he doesn't control, and no governments control, whether you get together with family. They make recommendations, but they're not canceling holidays because they can't. Strangely, an awful lot of people in the media will ask various premiers or the Prime Minister and say, "Are you canceling Thanksgiving or Halloween or Christmas?" Look, they can't cancel them, but they will make recommendations. Most people will listen to recommendations such as don't gather with too many people because most people want to be safe. And I think that's what happened here in Ontario around Thanksgiving. The advice was to stay within your household, and if you were single, well, try and keep groupings of 10 or less, join somebody else's household, but try and keep the whole group less than 10. We might end up seeing similar recommendations around Christmas. And yeah, it really stinks, which isn't the word the Prime Minister used. It's not good for any of us. It is taking a toll and will continue to take a toll, especially as it gets darker out earlier, as we get into colder weather, as we spend more time indoors, and therefore, until this virus is dealt with, more time alone or in small groups or seeing the same person over and over again. I hope you like your family because that might be all that you're seeing. We're social creatures though. And even if you've got a great family, you want to see other people or you want to see extended family. This is something that, we will all have to figure out, and politicians will have to be very careful with how they prescribe or make suggestions around these types of gatherings over the coming months.
Yeah, some of the psychologists I've spoken with have said that it's more damaging than the COVID-19 pandemic, especially when it comes to our psyche. Depression and anxiety cases are going through the roof because of this pandemic and not being able to see a lot of extended family and a lot of our friends.
And I can tell you that I've been trying to get statistics on suicide across Canada. It's very difficult right now to get those stats. They often take a lot longer to come out. So we're looking at older data right now. But Ontario's coroner told me a little while ago that opioid deaths alone, so that's not all suicides, that's just opioid deaths, are up 35 to 40%. That's just Ontario since the pandemic began. So you extrapolate that, take that out across the entire country, and things start to look grim. I can't speak for all the premiers. The one I pay most attention to is Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He has mentioned that as being one of the factors that he weighs as he looks at all the different options of, what do you close, what do you not close, how do you deal with things. He says we've got to be worried about mental health and suicides and depression and everything that goes with it.
Now, Brian, you're looking at COVID-19 cases and the information daily. Now, we've seen the large number of cases where you are in Ontario and right beside you in Quebec. You say it's important that people look beyond case counts. Why is that?
Because that is the headline number that's easy to talk about, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. Even in Alberta, I think you're up to close to 500 new cases a day. Well, given the size of Alberta, that would be over 1,500 cases a day in Ontario, the equivalent of. So you guys are having high case counts. The question becomes, what do you do with that? who is getting sick with COVID-19? Is it a younger cohort? Back in the spring, it was almost half were people over the age of 60. The average age of people dying from COVID-19 is well over the age of 80 across Canada. You have to start looking at who's getting sick. Do they have comorbidities? Is this affecting the general population? Can the health system handle it? Some people might say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if everyone that's dying from this is over the age of 80. We've still got to do everything we can. Yes, absolutely. Give everyone the best health care they can. But we're looking at a disease that primarily affects people who are elderly, who have comorbidities, who are fragile when it comes to their health in life as it is. We need to find ways to protect them. If you're just looking at case counts, you can easily be scared. But I can tell you here in Ontario, the hospitalizations, the intensive care unit admissions, the number of people on ventilators, the death count, it hasn't gone up to the same level as case counts have. And it's far lower than what we were back in the spring during the worst of this. So there's a lot of factors that we have to look at, and too often we just hear case counts up in X city or X province. Look beyond that, look beyond the headline.
In the United States, they've had now over 220,000 deaths attributed to the novel coronavirus. Here in Canada, we're also getting closer to a milestone, but much smaller, at 10,000. How do we compare to other countries, Brian?
Well, as in many things, Canada is middle of the pack if you look at the most common statistic cited, and that is deaths per 100,000. We're in the mid-20 range. It goes up and down, but around 25 deaths per 100,000. The United States is hovering up around 60. They're still doing better than a lot of European countries, including Spain and Britain. But in Sweden is up and around that range. I know people love to cite Sweden when we're talking about COVID-19. Canada is much below them. So our death per 100,000 is much better. When you flip it to another statistic, which is called the case fatality ratio, some people like that stat, some don't. But the case fatality ratio, Canada actually does worse than the United States. And that tells you your likelihood of dying from this. Now, it's still very unlikely in either country to die from COVID-19, but it is about almost double the rate in Canada. You are almost twice as likely to die from getting COVID-19 in this country compared to the United States. A lot of factors go into that. More younger people getting infected in the United States versus Canada. Treatments have been developed primarily in the United States and then transferred around the world. But everyone is doing better in terms of this, most somber of statistics, the death rate. Everyone around the world is doing much better in terms of keeping people alive once they have COVID-19 compared to the spring, because we know more about it, we know how to treat it. There may not be a cure, but that doesn't mean there aren't therapeutics and there aren't treatments to help people recover from this virus.
We recently saw the threat of an election over attempts by MPs to look into the Trudeau government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, and specifically the wheat charity scandal as well. Now, the government survived that vote, but there was another on Monday that was going to be a confidence vote, and then it wasn't. And then we were told we would not receive vaccines if the vote was successful. Brian, what's going on the Hill?
It was a little bit bizarre. I mean, less than 24 hours after they survived that confidence vote on the motion that would look into the WE scandal, they were floating to reporters like the Canadian press, whispering to them, oh, yeah, we're going to make this other vote for having the health committee study the government's response to COVID-19. We're going to make that a confidence motion because we don't like that one either. Well, they were roundly ridiculed because this is a motion that was looking at having the health committee look at the health impacts of COVID-19. That's exactly what they should be doing, Hal. So it made no sense for the government to say, if you go ahead with this, we'll force an election. So they backed off of that after about a day of ridicule. Then they decided over the weekend, we still don't want this, but we can't stop it. How will we try and convince Canadians this is bad? They were calling around to drug companies and other suppliers saying, your proprietary information will be released if this passes, so you better get out there. So you had companies like Pfizer saying, wait a minute, we're worried about this. The government actually claimed that Pfizer would not sell Canada a vaccine if this motion was passed. because they said this information could get out there. Now, it's going to get a little complicated. The Liberals don't want to release any documents related to how they handled COVID-19 because they don't want anything to come out that will make them look bad. And there's going to be something, whether it's overpaying, giving a friendly contract, not paying attention to warning signs, something will come out. But it's important that we know about this. So they're trying to stop this. They say that they want the Privy Council office, their bureaucrats in the Prime Minister's department, to be the ones to decide what gets blacked out and what gets released. The MPs say no, it's the law clerk, which reports to all of Parliament and is not part of the government. That's what the fight was essentially over, because if the Privy Council office does it, nothing politically embarrassing will ever be released. It'll just, a big black magic marker on the page. It was a false claim by the Liberals. It was fear-mongering. The world will not end. The motion passed on Monday. The Health Committee is going to start examining in the next week or so.
Brian, a new poll shows that most Canadians do not want a national election until at least the year 2022. Now, that same poll asks some interesting questions on immigration and how Canadians are a little more skittish about future increases in immigration over the next year. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, and so, most people don't want an election in a pandemic. Not that shocking. Most people don't want a lot of newcomers coming to the country in the middle of a pandemic. Also not shocking. Canada has traditionally been very open to immigration under all governments. So, support has been high when the system is run well. But during the pandemic, we were supposed to be bringing in 341,000 people this year. That was the government's immigration goal. They have brought in the first 8 months, maybe about 100,000 people. That's a dramatic drop. That's about 43% of what they had hoped to. And the reasoning is due to the pandemic, the travel restrictions, and the high unemployment rate. I mean, it's not fair to the people coming into the country. It's not fair to the ones here, bringing in hundreds of thousands of more people at a time when Canadians are unemployed. And it's not fair for the person showing up saying, well, I was expecting a job. I had a promise of a job. Well, the economy shut down. So a lot of reasons around that. And about 52% of Canadians say, you know what, let's just keep things where they are. Let's keep it low. That is probably the highest I've ever seen that, Hal.
A couple of politicians went barefaced and then ended up being red-faced after being photographed not wearing masks. Brian, one was Federal Health Minister Patty Hajdu, and the other was a young Conservative MP in Ontario, Sam Oosterhoff.
Yeah, so you could say that the health minister was telling everyone to do as she says, not as Hajdu. But Can I get a rim shot there? Patty Hajdu was photographed in the Air Canada lounge at Pearson Airport in Toronto. She says that she only took the mask off to eat and drink. Others say no, she was sitting there chatting with people. She was taking phone calls. Now, the photograph was put out on Twitter by an Alberta Conservative, or an Alberta UCP staffer, actually. And you can't see what is to the right of Patty Hajdu, but there is no food or drink visible. She took a lot of ribbing in the House of Commons. That's about as far as it's going to get. Sam Oosterhoff is in the Ford government. He's an MLA here in Ontario, and one of the youngest ones ever elected. He comes from a large Dutch Reformed family, and they had a family gathering. It's just the family, 42 people. It was within the 50 limit that's allowed at a banquet center, but there are claims that none of them were wearing masks. They all took a photograph together, jammed up against each other, no masks. He's the parliamentary assistant to the education minister, so calls for his resignation. But the premier says, no, he's apologized, he's learned, it's over. I think they just both have to deal with embarrassment.
The big political story south of the border is the U.S. presidential election coming up on November the 3rd. Polls are showing that both Biden and Trump have their support. Now, from a Canadian's perspective, is it better that Trump wins or Biden? I'm thinking here in Alberta for the energy sector, perhaps Trump.
Well, this is always an interesting question, because if you poll Canadians on who they would vote for in the U.S. election, it's normally above 80% would pick the Democratic candidate. Doesn't matter who's running for the Republicans, Canadians just think it's got to be the Democrat. And a lot of people think that the Democrats are nicer to Canada. That's not always the case. In fact, it's mostly not the case when it comes to trade. Bill Clinton was good. He had a good relationship with Jean Chrétien, but even he brought in protectionist measures. They all do. But Biden would, he has said, stop Keystone XL. he has said he will stop oil imports. That would be devastating to Alberta's economy. He keeps bragging, was part of the group that helped save the auto industry during the 2008 financial meltdown. Well, the Obama administration, part of their plan was to take all the jobs back to Michigan. They wanted the jobs out of Ontario. And it was only because the Harper government and the McGuinty government went in on part of the bailout that those jobs didn't leave. But that was the American plan under Obama. And of course, he was part of the Obama administration that brought in some of the most draconian Buy American provisions that Canada had to fight. So yeah, Trump has had his share of protectionist measures. But when you look at it, Obama was probably worse, and Democrats tend to be worse. Republicans are no saints. None of them are when it comes to this. They all have some congressman in a district that they need to win in the next election barking at them that you've got to protect this plant or that plant and do something and, do it. And, who cares about Canada? Well, bottom line is Republicans tend to be nicer to Canada when it comes to trade, and that is our biggest lifeline with the U.S. So Trump's probably better. The fact that it's still too close to call tells you that Americans are quite divided.
It'll be interesting to see what happens on November the 3rd. Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
The storms of life can at times take a real toll on our mental and emotional health. Today we're chatting with a woman who has an amazing story of healing and how God helped her after she was viciously gang raped about 10 years ago. Her name is Colette Aikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, an organization whose mission it is to help Christians become effective in sharing Christ in everyday conversations. Colette, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here, so thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure having you on board. Colette, describe first of all for our viewers who you were before you were being raped.
I was just a regular, maybe, I think we have to go really far back. I think that the issue of sexuality was put on my heart when I was younger. I was abused when I was a child. And I also think so as much as that was also for evil, I also think that just ignited in me a awareness of sexuality and the fact that there's this, there's something that we as Christians often don't talk about. And I grew up in a believing family, an amazing, loving home. I was raised Christian, and I know what I believe, and I know the God who loves me. And that was, but it was always kind of a bit of there was an undercurrent of this in my life. I was dealing with compulsive masturbation, and then of course I was raped when I was in high school, in junior high. So it was really, it changed everything. And yet at the same time, this was something that was already, there was something there. There was a part of me that wanted to have this conversation. There was a part of me that had been ignited in this. And, all of, just like everything, I only learned from all these things. And now I'm able to just talk about what happened and realize that, God's grace is more.
Let's describe what actually led to that fateful day when you were raped.
It was just a regular day. I was just a young girl. And it's hard to talk about the specifics of that day, Hal. But it was a place where I should have been safe, and I was with people where I should have been safe. And I was not being kept safe that day. And it was just terrible realizing that I could be in a safe community and be, I think I grew up knowing that, knowing the scriptures, knowing that we all have gone astray. We all like sheep have gone astray, and there's no one who does good, not even one. And yet you believe that people just won't do certain things, right? And then I had to learn that even Christians themselves will do depraved things. And that was very, very difficult because it completely shattered my spirituality and my faith in my community. And yet, God was able to keep me safe at that time afterward. So.
Those people who attacked you, were they ever captured and charged?
No, they were not.
Wow. Is it still an open investigation or is it a cold case with the police?
It's a cold case with the police because it ended up being a historic investigation because I was unable to come forward with my testimony and with my experience until just a few years ago, and by then too much time had already passed. And when the perpetrators were, in being investigated, they denied, they refused to have lie detector tests, and then refused basically all communication, and then the investigation went dead from there.
Let me ask you something, Colette. It's been about 10 years now. Have you been able to forgive those who did this horrifying thing to you?
Yes, I have. I have been able to forgive them. And my body and my mind do not forget. And even my heart does not forget. But my life is full of brokenness as well. And like I said, we are all equal under God. We've all sinned equally. And so, yes, I have forgiven them.
Colette, how did this really affect your relationships with men and women?
I think it just kind of blew up what was already an issue for me. So I was already, just like any regular girl, I was going through the end of puberty, and so just like any other any other girl, I was jittery around boys. I became aroused at awkward times. I wondered if I was gay because there were girls that I really loved. I wondered if I was bi. I wondered if maybe I was actually a boy. And so all these things were on my mind. But the rape, and then especially what's really important for people to understand is that because of what happened, the trauma, I also became addicted to pornography. And it wasn't just, people tend to say, well, girls, it's different for girls. Girls are not addicted to hardcore pornography. Well, yeah, they are. When we Google something, we find the exact same thing as men. We find the exact same thing as children and as seniors, right? So we need to realize that the internet's not discretionary that way. And as much as people say that women are not visually wired, we also are visually stimulated, some women more than others, and we're not all the same. And so for me, pornography became a real problem. I really struggled with pornography addiction and sexual addiction because of what happened, which led to all kinds of problems, right? I mean, because of the porn addiction, what happened was it's something we call a hypersexualized outlook on life. So what that means is that I just saw sexuality everywhere. I would just be walking down the road and I would see people crossing the street toward me, and immediately when my mind would go, I bet they're going to go have sex. Completely out of context. And I wasn't raised that way. It's important to understand that that's not how I was. I didn't think anybody else experienced life that way. So I felt very, very outside. I felt very alone.
So let's talk about how God really helped, first of all, with your healing after being attacked and raped, and secondly, through this porn addiction.
Right. Well, what's really amazing is that I think the one thing that we have to remember is that human sexuality is inconsistent, and human sexuality is subject to change and subject to trauma and subject to brain chemistry and genetics and all these things. But Christian sexuality and moral sexuality is not dependent on those things. And so for me, what became huge was realizing that I was able to see the trauma, I was able to see my addiction, I was able to see the fallout, all the consequences. I was able to see that through the lens of a Christian worldview. And because of that, I was able to God reminded me that there are constants, that there are realities, that no matter what happens to my body, no matter what happens in my life, no matter what emotions I have or thoughts I have, these are things that do not change. Objective truths about me, about other people, about the life that God has given me. Those are things that do not change. And that completely changed everything, because then it was no longer dependent on how I felt and on how I perceived things to be. I could read the scriptures and trust that reality is what it is, regardless of how I feel.
Now, you spoke earlier about maybe some sexual confusion. You thought maybe you were bi at one point in time. Did you receive counseling to help you seek out your true identity? when it comes to your sexuality?
Yes, I did. So after my husband and I got married, we actually, of course, which is really inevitable when there's sexual trauma and sexual addiction. We started having some problems, and so I went to counseling, and he went to counseling, and it was really what was also amazing was that I was at the university at the time. I was taking a university course on sex addiction. And as I was taking this course, I went into it just thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is really cool. And then because I enjoyed that, I thought it was interesting to talk about what makes sex addiction addiction and what makes other sexuality normal or healthy, right? So we talked about that and we had those discussions. And then as time went on and as I was going through counseling, I realized, wait a minute, it makes sense that I am understanding this language because this is a problem that I have. And I didn't even realize it until then. And so there was a real moment for me, if you don't mind my sharing. I share it not to be graphic, but I share it because I want people to understand how horrible this moment can be. But I know many people who have come to this moment, and that there's hope for you. There's healing. There can be that turnaround because there's a beautiful plan of sexuality that we can follow. And so what happened for me was that I was just using pornography like any other day, and what I was watching turned out to be one girl with several men. And as I was watching, I could see that she was trying to push one of them away and starting to say no. And as I was watching, I realized there is something wrong with me. There is something wrong. I need help. And that was really the moment that God just changed everything. I picked up the phone, I called a trusted friend, and I said, I need to tell you something. And that's what changed everything.
You know, Colette, you really hit the nail on the head there. I've spoken to other people who are addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, and they say you have to hit your rock bottom and realize that you need help. You can't have other people say to you, you have a problem, pointing fingers at you. The walls go up, right? People become defensive, say, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, So you have to reach that rock bottom before you finally realize that, yes, I finally need help. And it's amazing that you did that. Outside of the counseling, and you reached out to your friend, and of course you're praying to our Heavenly Father, what else really helped you overcome the addiction?
What really helped me overcome the addiction was the support group that I was able to start. So there was a contact that I had in Lethbridge, a man who had already set up a Christian support group for men who were dealing with sex addiction and porn addiction. And so when I got into contact with him, I asked him, is there one for women? And he said, well, no, but you should start one. So I started one, and I sat alone in a room waiting for people to join me for a year. It didn't really take off. And then suddenly somebody contacted me and said, you need to come and speak to this group of young women. And when we started talking, we were all like, oh, me too. I can't believe you're saying the words that I have always felt. We were sharing stories where we were just speaking each other's language, and it was just unreal. And so we started a support group where we were just praying for each other and helping each other to live out our sexuality the way that we believe we should, based on our worldview. And so that's what was really, what I think has been so hard for me in being in Lethbridge in the last few months, is knowing that our city, along with so many other cities, have banned the kind of counseling that I went through. And because it was, unfortunately, we think that the type of counseling that comes to, where we talk about sexuality and issues of gender, we think that we have to make sure that we protect LGBTQ people, and we should. And that's why we need to be really careful that we define things, because I've had the therapy that has now been banned, but I have specifically asked for it because it helped me reduce my unwanted sexual attractions and unwanted sexual behavior. And because of that, it is now defined as being illegal. And that's something we need to speak up more. Women like me, people like me, we need to speak up and say, this is counseling that I went to. It was not torture. It was a good thing. And I need to be free to choose the counseling that I went to, because just because something illegal is done to me, does that mean that it should be illegal for me to seek help?
Colette, what advice do you have for those who may be going through confusing times like you experienced, especially when it comes to sex and gender?
I think what's really important for us to understand is that we've been getting one dimension of an idea about sexuality. And so I've been doing some research into some of the sex education that we get in our community of Lethbridge. when it comes to these topics, some of the organizations that provide sex education. And this is where we learn about sexuality. Unfortunately, the sex education that we receive and that youth receive is unfortunately it's not holistic in the fact that it doesn't include spiritual aspects. And so what happens is that people like myself, our sexuality gets conflicted with other things and we don't know where to go. And we need to know that there are other options. And so it's really important, especially that the Christian community, that the church community step up and say, there's a Christian worldview, Christian view of sexuality that offers you hope and healing. And it goes far beyond any kind of fleeting sexual identity.
You talked about some of the therapy that's available now for women. You know, it's been around for men for a very long time, especially the programs. How about today? Are there still great support programs for women today addicted to porn?
I would say, I think if a woman reached out to me now compared to 5 years ago, I think it's possible that there might be a few more resources, a few more books. But to be honest, Hal, it has not taken off as it should. You know, men are getting the help that they need, but there's no the support group for women in Lethbridge is no longer running because there was nobody else who was able to step up and take over. There's not many groups of them. Even across Canada, even in the United States, they're there, but you really have to look for them. And in our community, especially in our small community, people feel like there's no help. And that's why I'm so eager to tell people that there is help. And organizations like Faith Beyond Belief really can show you that there's more. There really is hope.
I was thinking maybe, you should take the lead and take the charge, and you're doing that already with Faith Beyond Belief. Colette Ikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, thanks so much for your powerful story today and for joining me.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.